30 seconds or so and we'll get going. Make sure your volume's set and you have your coffee or water. Looks like the numbers of joiners is slowing down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. And with our webinar today, this is Oxford Computer Group. We're going to talk about deploying Intune, some benefits of Intune and best practices, some of the things we've seen along the way, and things that we expect to do to help other customers move forward, and particularly where it relates to migrating to Intune from other platforms, whether it's EAS or another MDM platform. Joining me today on the webinar is one of our senior consultants, Jeffery Williams, who does a lot of this Intune work with me, and I'll turn the talk over to him after we go over a few of the basic drivers. And then we'll also have Conor Logan join us, Delivery Engagement Manager, who's been working on projects exactly like what we're talking about today, who will give us some of the information from his perspective. But first, let me, I don't know why I lost my slide presentation here. Give me just a second. There it is. And we'll go to the next slide. Our agenda today, like I said, we'll talk a little about, sorry about that, I don't know where that came from. Talk a little bit about the business drivers, touch on Microsoft's announcement about Windows AutoPilot, which a large part of is driven through Intune. Also touch on Intune and conditional access. We're seeing a lot of interest in conditional access, and most of our Intune implementations include conditional access pieces, so it's a good thing to talk about. And then we'll talk about the different types of Intune installs, and then dig into our learnings from those deployment experiences that we've had. And we do have a whole team here today talking about Intune, the team that we take to Intune engagements, or one of the teams that we take to Intune engagements. So people who have real world experience deploying and operating these systems and going beyond just the technical piece, but also talking about how we help the customer and help users move forward. About 60 minutes. We're all a little long-winded, so I might run a couple minutes over. You can submit questions anytime. There is a question in the webinar management question portal. We'll see those come up. If they're important at the moment, we can address them. Otherwise, we'll just finish up at the end. We are recording the webinar. I hope Jackie's recording the webinar, and we'll send you a link to the recording once we get it all cleaned up and ready to go for you, so you get a copy of it. Oxford Computer Group, if you don't know who we are, we're worldwide, a long storied history in identity and access management, both solutions and training in the UK, in Netherlands, in Germany, the US, a 7-time winner of Microsoft's Partner of the Year award, and a finalist for 10 years running. A pretty good streak for us, doing a lot of work in the identity space with Azure, as Microsoft calls out that identity is the new control plane. And we see that in Intune with conditional access and all these pieces that we're going to talk about. So let's get to it. What are some of the big business drivers for deploying Intune? We know cost is a big driver. Microsoft has positioned Intune very well in the market, along with the supporting technologies with identity, as I spoke, with Azure, with conditional access, with the applications for all the mobile apps from Microsoft that can be managed, all of these pieces. Mobility management choices. We have a number of different ways to work with Intune, whether that's in concert with SCCM. We have a flexible REST API that allows us to access all the features of Intune through the Microsoft Graph API. Everything from running reports to making changes to policy can be done through that REST API. And of course, we tie it together with all of the identity and access management that we get with Azure and with Microsoft's Information Manager, MIM, and or FIM if you're running on older versions. A lot of our customers own Intune through the enterprise mobility and security subscription from Microsoft, which contains a number of components. Sorry again, I don't know where that is coming from. The EMS subscription provides a number of tools to help with mobility and security, including rights management, multi-factor authentication, all kinds of various things that are scattered throughout that license SKU. We also see a lot of customers who are looking at their current MDM solution and an upcoming license renewal, and they want to move off of that. This can be a real driver and be a point of concern for customers in how they get their users moved off their existing MDM solution in time before that license renewal. We also see that the line between desktop and mobile device management is fading. It really is enterprise mobility management that we're managing. PCs, Macs, mobile devices, everything's mobile these days. Virtually everything's mobile. So you have to treat it that way. We talk a lot about the reduction in the network perimeter, that more and more users are operating outside of it in the cloud, independent of our domain. So we need these EMM solutions to manage those devices. And we also have to manage the data, not just the device itself, but we want to make sure access to the data and the data itself is protected. And as we said, cost is a driver. So important, we'll mention it twice or 3 times maybe. We have a couple different implementation options. The most basic is mobile device management with Office 365. This allows you to do some basic management from Office 365 for controlling mobile devices, requiring a PIN, simple things like that. Intune Standalone is a cloud-only enterprise mobility management suite, which you use through the Azure portal. Microsoft is deprecating the old Silverlight portal, which not a whole lot of people were really happy about. Now Intune is in the same Azure portal where when you manage users, VMs, all the other features from identity management to information protection within the Azure portal. Intune Hybrid is a combination of System Center Configuration Manager on-prem, or on-premises, excuse me, on-premises, managing servers and PCs and desktops, the classic management system. We can tie that to Intune for a single pane of glass to manage both the on-premise and the mobile devices. We'll be moving along. Microsoft is doing work to bring some of that functionality that we're used to on-prem into the mobile space, and I believe Jeffrey will talk a little bit about that. Windows AutoPilot also is part of that, and that's really the next phase of management with Microsoft, taking what used to be in our GPOs that we distribute to those locally domain-joined machines and providing that same functionality in configuration service providers in the actual devices so that we can push out GPO type settings through Intune. As we said, conditional access is a big driver for users. Intune supports a very complex conditional access configuration, allowing us to protect access to data in the cloud. So it's basically device-based as it comes through Intune. We can protect Exchange on premises, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Dynamics Online, Skype Online, Skype for Business Online, and OneDrive for Business, of course, because that's in SharePoint Online. We can base those decisions, whether you get access, don't get access, or require multi-factor, based on network location, also on device risk, which can be defined a number of different ways, how healthy a device is, some additional identity and application risk that we talk about. This is available for Windows PCs and Mac OS, whether they're corporate owned and or BYOD. We do both BYOD configurations for customers, corporate only, and a mix or a blend of those two. And they have different needs and different requirements, and we adapt for those. Intune's conditional access, as I said, can also take additional signals. So if you use Microsoft's identity protection, Microsoft will monitor the use of the identity, will protect and raise risk alerts based on misuse of identity or brute force attacks or logons from unusual locations. And we can also do application risk. We'll talk a little bit about a partner of ours that we use to provide that application risk score, which allows us to invoke conditional access and protect data when we think a device is at risk. This conditional access extends through Azure to allow you to grant or block access to SaaS applications or on-premises applications that are published through the app proxy based on conditional access. Again, allowing me to block access, require that the user perform multi-factor, perhaps require that the user reset their password, or simply allow the user in because everything looks copacetic. I'll talk a little bit about deployment learnings. I'll start on that, and then we'll bring in the rest of our team here. We want to point out that mobile device management, MDM, really is not complete mobile security. We're able to perform some functions on the device to require PIN or encryption. We can manage the applications to some level, but what we can't do, particularly in a BYOD scenario, is know everything that's on the device and how those things are operating. There are third parties, including Lookout, that provide this service. They evaluate applications that are in public marketplaces, applications that are installed by users, and they evaluate those applications using machine learning and looking directly at the native code to see if these applications are performing something we don't want them to, whether it's malware or leaking contacts out where you don't want them to. Lookout provides a signal back to conditional access, warning us that there is an application that puts the user's device at risk. Based on that information, we can then lock down the device until the user remediates by removing that poor application. Now, Lookout tells us that 95% of the time, when a user has Lookout installed, Lookout notices a bad application and informs the user, which is the first thing it does. 95% of the time, the user will self-remediate and remove that application. If you haven't heard about these types of solutions, you certainly should take a look at them. They really extend the ability to protect our users and provide them feedback when they're doing things that put them at risk. So these services add this ability to monitor these devices and the applications. Lookout also does its own jailbreaking and rooting detection, which also helps supplement what we do in Intune. So good partner, great product. If you're not aware of them, you should probably take a look at it. The big three drivers, though, again, cost, well, cost, and cost. But cost is a big one, obviously. Approximately $6 a user. Prices vary. Your mileage may vary. You got a better deal with Microsoft if you can. The more that you throw into these suites, the better your price tends to get. Microsoft works that way, and everybody actually benefits from that. Intune's flexibility, as we said, is one of its strengths. We can drive Intune the way we want to, whether we run it through SCCM, whether we run it from the console, or whether we run REST APIs to drive the services that we have in Intune. We have a lot of flexibility in the way to use it. We have a lot of flexibility in how businesses can choose to use it, whether we allow or block BYOD devices into the organization. We can integrate with DEP and VPP in Apple, if you know what those mean. A lot of flexibility in how we use Intune and how we set it up for our users. Identity and access management integration is a big piece of this. As I've said, identity is a control plane. The only thing that protects us out in the wilds of the internet when we're out roaming around is that identity. If that's compromised, not managed, we're at risk. With a solid identity and access management solution, you're protecting your users and you're protecting your organization. Some of the business problems we solve, as I talked about, conditional access allows us to protect on-premises and Office 365 mail and data, making sure our data stays safe and is on the devices that we want it to be, and is not available on devices that we don't want it to be. We can issue corporate-owned phones to tablets. We can securely provide BYOD or personal device allowance or COPE type services with these users. We can even extend this, because it's an EMM solution, to managing our kiosks. We have a customer who is using this to manage iPads that are in a retail location, and we manage all of those devices with Intune, manage their wireless network for those customer-facing devices, which are actually kiosks running on an iPad. I wanted to talk a little bit about AutoPilot. It's new, just coming up for us, but what the goal here is to simplify the end user's out-of-box experience. Windows AutoPilot consists of an Active Directory domain join in the cloud, domain joining with Azure Active Directory, that adds an automatic enrollment in Intune for management. The user, of course, chooses language, keyboard, a network to connect to, so it can do all of this provisioning. The user then logs on with their email address. We create the Azure AD account, we enroll them in Intune. We can then start flowing software down to those users and policies from Intune. Microsoft will add the ability to do an automatic upgrade to the enterprise SKU. So what this means is that we can drop ship PCs from our vendor of choice directly to our employee anywhere in the world, and that user can join our organization, get management, and get productive literally within a half hour of opening the box. It's really quite amazing. I've done a little bit of this work with some customers. We don't have all of the pieces of AutoPilot, but I encourage you to keep an ear to the ground on this. This is going to be a sea change for IT organizations and how much effort we spend in getting our users up and operating. And as I promised, as I do normally in these engagements, I bring on my capable senior consultant, Jeffery Williams, Jeffery Van Williams, who will be taking you through some of the things we've done with migrating users to MDM. So I got to click here and make Jeffery the presenter, and then he should be coming up here shortly. Yes, I want to make Jeffery the presenter. Jeffery, you should be good to go.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Hopefully everyone can see my screen here. So again, as Mark said, my name is Jeffery Williams. I'm a senior consultant at Oxford, and I've been with Oxford for about 4 years, going on my 4th year. I'm engaged in a lot of these Intune migrations and deployments, where Mark is the senior architect and I'm the consultant. And at this point, I'm going to actually talk a bit about the actual migration from one MDM to another. During the past year, we've seen quite an increase, not in just Intune engagements or enterprise mobility plus security deployments, but actual migrations from one MDM solution to Intune. Just as Mark was saying, I'm going to touch upon some of the primary technical processes and some of the practices that can be useful when you're assisting customers in migrating to Intune from another mobile device management solution. As this graphic illustrates, it can actually not be too unlike juggling when you consider how many components can be involved and you have to manage multiple elements at once. So it's a good idea to be careful and have a good solid strategy ahead of time for your migration. And while it'd be nice to have a just by the book and by the numbers process for migrations of this type, organizations are each pretty unique in and of themselves. So you can't really standardize it as much as we'd like. Generally, and through close work with an engagement manager, the resources that are available from the customer side will allow you to more or less lay out a project for migration as we see here. It will be moving into implementation. As you can see, since there'd be ahead of time, you'll proactively identify goals and specifics to each unique engagement. And hopefully you'll have designed a solid organic action plan that all players involved will be familiar with by that time. And you can more or less follow things as you see here. Determining goals and objectives. The scenarios for support are already going to be identified by that point. You should have a solid rollout plan. Developing a communication plan is one of the more critical components, and Conor will speak to that in a little bit later. But I focus primarily on the design and implementation side, as well as the testing and validation. So, moving on. This is an outline, if you will, of sort of the meat and potatoes portion of an engagement like this on this slide. And as you can see, you're going to be spending some time with the customer, guiding them through the actual Intune on Azure instant setup. Time is spent reviewing the existing mobile device management solution and its requirements, because that's going to more or less define how Intune is going to be configured. Understanding that design is what's going to allow us to be able to move right into our primary setup. This screen is also denoting that we'll be going through and evaluating applications that are currently being made available, plus any additional apps that may be deployed or desired to be deployed outside of those that exist already within an organization. We'll be doing things at this point in the migration process where beyond the basic setup, we'll be configuring and deploying the applications, as well as any protection policies that may exist or be needed, and beyond that, certificate authentication and the required infrastructure for that if the customer's PKI supports any requirements such as it. All right, so
Jeffery,
getting in.
can I interrupt you for just a second?
Absolutely, Mark. Yes.
So when you're working with a customer to do this kind of rollout, how do you discover all that information in your previous slide?
Well,
and
there's
this.
Sure. We generally will have a set of predefined use cases that they've identified as critical for their organization, and use cases will be followed, and a good comparative analysis of the settings that they have in their existing mobile device management solution will be walked through, and we'll evaluate the settings therein and determine how Intune in that instance needs to be set up so that it can match and or exceed the settings that exist in the existing solution. That's generally takes a lot of preparation and pre-planning. So a lot of meetings ahead of time to be proactive are of course going to be attended by all the players involved. I think that's what you're looking to do, and I'm going to talk to that in a little bit.
Exactly what I was asking. Thank you very much.
You got it. Back to this one. So into the actual nitty-gritty here, the preparation of the Intune instance for mobile device management. This is where we get in and dig in with the actual administration or who has been deemed an Intune service administrator. That individual and myself will work and begin the configuration of their Intune instance. It's really beneficial, as I was saying, when Mark asked that question about having pre-planning meetings, reviewing use cases, and taking into account the considerations centered around security and other objectives that customers may need and require. Things like authentication methods currently in place. Does multi-factor need to be enabled or enforced? How are devices presently authenticating for things like email or VPN? It's really important to discuss these things ahead of time, and I don't want to take any of Conor's opportunity to speak to those away from him, but pre-planning, critical. Likewise, you need to know what types of devices you're going to be supporting and the actual numbers of devices. That's very important and proven so on engagements that we've been on. Likewise, we'll talk quite a bit on applications, deployment, and any line of business apps that customers may have. The businesses require different apps for their operations, and likewise, each of these engagements can be completely different, and everybody has their own unique set of applications they need to deploy. Moving on, configuration of Intune as a replacement. It takes a fair amount of analysis, just like I was telling Mark, and as he had asked in that question. Some of the experiences that we've been on where it actually permits us to review the existing mobile device management solution if we have an administrator sit. I found on some of these engagements, well, actually the majority of migration engagements, that the very folks that manage an existing MDM are going to be those same people that are going to be controlling Intune. So with that being said, they generally have access into both interfaces. Having a side-by-side comparison can help. We do a lot of assessments and comparing of what the setup exists in, or consists of in the existing MDM prior to setting up those same settings in Intune. It can be beneficial to do that also because it's very easy with all of the technology and workplaces that exist within Intune on Azure, now that things have migrated from the classic portal over. On some of these engagements, I've discovered that people really tend to want to experience the other technologies and workplaces that exist within Azure. So I have to remind them to not get too carried away and stay out of machine analytics and things like Azure Stream while we're focusing on the Intune deployment. But that could be considered scope creep, but it's more just click happy customers. So here's where we actually get into an outline of the basic setup of Intune, and we'll be doing things such as the actual assignment of the appropriate roles for access. Every Intune instance needs at least one solid administrator, a service administrator for Intune at least, and we'll establish those by assigning Intune roles. We'll move then into the branding of the company portal and the actual Azure instance if we need to. We'll define terms and conditions. It's usually involves meeting with HR and or directly copying them from the existing MDM, but usually people like to change them up. They've found some type of deficiency where they want to revise their terms and conditions and what the end user is going to be encountering when they enroll. Likewise, we'll go here and begin the configuration of platform-specific features. I think Mark was talking about some of the device enrollment programs and the volume purchase programs that exist for iOS devices, configuring Android for work if needed, as well as some of the things like Windows 10 and the new AutoPilot. We haven't really done that yet since it's a new technology that's being introduced, but I can foresee it in the future. Configuration of compliance policies, configuration profiles, as well as any profiles or policies centered around apps and app protection. Those will be configured, all part of the basic setup of an Intune instance. A lot more than that, but due to time, I'm going to move on. And here we go, the licensing slide. Licensing for Intune users is important enough that I felt like it needed its own slide here. Licensing for users is basically, if you don't know, everybody that's going to be accessing Intune is going to require a license so that they can enroll a device. There's multiple means of accomplishing this, and some of those include the Office 365 Administrative Center or Administrative Console, and likewise you can do bulk licensing through PowerShell. And there is a new feature that is currently in preview for group-based license optioning through Azure Active Directory, which is pretty neat, and I've included it here. I've lost control. Deployment of applications will be one of the next phases. Distribution of apps is critical to any engagement, be it a deployment or a migration. and dependent upon what the customer needs and may have, they may have decided, okay, we don't need this app any longer. We've got a new line of business app that we'd like to deploy. It runs the gamut. I've had a plethora of experiences as far as what types of apps people want to deploy. It basically boils down to publishing that application for each platform where applicable. The assignment type for each application is going to be specified, and that by that I mean whether it's just presented as an available application to those who are enrolled in accessing their apps, or whether it's a required app. You can even specify for it to be uninstalled. And a large amount of time is spent testing the behavior of those apps once they're actually published, prior to assigning them en masse to a group of users. We'll have that pilot test group identified, and they will go through the procedures and put that app through its paces to make sure that it functions correctly before making it available to a large consensus of people. And finally, configuring certificate provisioning. Lots of times there's going to be the need based on business requirements for services such as VPN, maybe wireless, or email access and profiles, for those to be authenticated by certificates. It's beneficial to users because because it prevents them from having enter username and password in repeatedly, and it's a very good user experience. And that being said, Intune can assign multiple types of certificates, those being Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol and PKCS number 12 certificates. Each certificate profile, or I'm sorry, each platform targeted for a certificate profile will have to have its own configuration, and it should be noted that there is infrastructure required for this, for a connector. So change management can come into play there, because you might have to, if they actually want to distribute certificates through their Intune instance, they'll have to have a connector server. And I believe, with that being said, I'm going to call upon Conor Logan, the engagement manager, who is generally accompanies myself and Mark on these engagements. So, Conor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Let me get set up here to present. There we go. Share screen. All right. Everyone should be able to see my screen. And so I want to take you through.
And then it went back to the webinar header, deploying Intune. We had your
Thank you
for a second.
Yeah, it looked fine, and I agree. Now I do not. All right, here we go. Now you should see it. Should be coming up in a second.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Thank you. So I'm Conor Logan, Senior Delivery Engagement Manager, and wanted to take you through some lessons learned from some real-world experience with clients. The communication plan. I mean, we're dealing with people's lifeline nowadays, right? The device in your pocket is the most important one in many cases. Especially for companies that have sales departments, things like that, where they're out in the field and doing a lot of things on a mobile device. Having that access is critical. So taking that into account as you go through requirements gathering is going to be critical. So you want to understand, where are these users, where are these users living, what is the email setup that they're migrating from, and where are the dates that we're trying to hit in terms of deliver that project, and what types of users do you have? Are they all going to be considered fairly savvy? Are there VIP type customers involved that you need to set up specific hand-holding type services? And mentioned in kind of humor, but it does make a lot of sense, you know, dealing with those upper level people. Take your time. Make sure you communicate the process to them in very, very digestible steps. What I've found, or what we've found, is that the word of mouth here is going to be a big deal. Grapevine starts to take hold at some point, especially when you're dealing with people's mobile devices. So picking that first department that you're going to roll this out to and subsequently iterate your educational materials upon is going to be paramount. So make sure, you know, you're selecting a good group of users that have that right mix of technical savvy, but they're also going to give you good feedback on your educational materials, because you'll want to iterate quickly, so that by that second group, you're really humming along with good educational materials. And that also includes making sure that the most important things are communicated. And in this case, with people's mobile devices, it's what isn't going to happen to their mobile device once they enroll with Intune that in a lot of cases becomes the most important. We're not going to listen in on your conversations. We're not going to see what you're doing through your camera, those kinds of things. They may seem some of the questions may seem silly at some point, but they are of interest to those users. And you know, depending on their trajectory coming in and their level of expertise with their device, you know, those questions are important to them, so they're important to us. We want to know what's the accurate count of devices. That's very important, and it may depend on the level of the person in the company. So then that person may be a VIP, so they're allowed up to 10 devices, whereas it might just be an assistant and they're only allowed to connect their phone. You know, depending on the client, it could be very granular in how it's set up. So it's more important, really, what's the lay of the land in terms of total devices. But you'll want to keep track of both. You want to know how many users are going through and then how many devices. And that'll also become relevant as you're migrating your user base, because most people will say, oh, I've moved my phone over, I'm done. Well, did you remember the iPad or the Android tablet that you had? Did you move that over? Those types of items are very important. Clearly communicating to the help desk or service desk organization is going to be really important. Clearly defining what does it mean to support this project. You know, you may think that there's just, you know, okay, we're unenrolling from a previous MDM solution, or we're rolling out MDM for the first time. Here are the steps to go ahead and do that. But there's a whole bunch of things that could jump in the way of people even getting to step one. And probably the biggest thing I've seen is in terms of platform version on those mobile devices. How up to date are they? Are they forced to update every so often? Or do you have people out there with iPhone 5Cs on, you know, iOS 8.x, and that's precluding them from installing the Intune company portal because they have too old of an iOS version? And maybe they actually have to have their whole phone upgraded physically to be able to even do this. You want to get, you know, just like with a lot of different IAM projects, that pre-work is really paramount here. Understanding what's the lay of the land from a mobile device versioning standpoint, and not just their physical device, what version they have, but the version of the software that's running on that device. And that really all serves, that plus what Jeffrey had, you know, spoke to just previously in terms of certificates and email configuration, things like that, is going to lead to success. Because even if people want to see something change or get better about their experience with their mobile device and how it integrates with their company email and contacts, things like that, it's that apples to apples experience that really kind of spells WIN, you know, in the end. Because even if it's got its quirks, keeping their experience as much or as close to what they're used to before advancing it seems to go over very well. So things to that end, you know, we had really, really good feedback and really drove compliance to have training videos done, and in some cases even just have them, you know, enlist the client, enlist maybe their wireless communications team, or, a really gregarious person from their support organization that everyone knows and likes, that kind of that friendly face that everyone looks to and says like, oh, that's the guy I turn to when I need help. Enlist that person. Say, hey, help us. Let's create a fun video that is informative and concise, but also enjoyable to watch. Put that up on the corporate intranet or wherever is best laid out per the client, and that'll help to drive adoption and help make it feel kind of friendly and familiar, especially to those not so savvy customers. They see a friendly face that they know and have seen in the hallways or something like that. It's going to help drive adoption. It will make them a little bit more inclined to try instead of just calling support saying, can I have someone walk me through this? We want people to try the instructions and try to reduce the amount of tickets to the support organization. Again, iterating through training, again, picking that first group is very, very important. They're going to help you to mature your educational materials quickly. And then reporting is really great. How are we going to report upward to management level? What do they care about? You're going to want to get their buy-in early and understand, hey, is it very important for you to see a decrease in the user base on the MDM solution that we are sunsetting? What is relevant information? Because you can really spin your wheels coming up with the best way to report up. And maybe all that was needed is a thermometer saying devices are being enrolled. And that's all that people care about. Or maybe they want a lot of heavily granular information. It depends. But spending that time, that pre-work, again, the reporting pre-work, the understanding the lay of the land from the mobile device standpoint and versioning, all those things lead to success down the line. And I'll pass it back, I guess, to Mark and to kind of close it out.
You could just leave that slide up. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Conor. And Jeffrey, thank you both. And I apologize. That was not our plan to be handing off the slide motion. And I made a mistake. So I apologize to everyone for that. We do have one question here that had not been posed, and I thought I'd bring that up. Hasnain has asked, can we enroll Windows 7 system to Windows Intune? Will there be any challenge if the system has SCCM agent installed on it? I don't know, Jeffrey, do you want to take that one?
Presently, support for that does exist, but it's not the best experience user-wise. I've recently had an engagement where we set up and tested some Windows 7 systems, and it was quite a bit of work to get that set up. Primarily trying to get, in that particular instance, set up, just have a machine imaged with that operating system was the challenge. But yes, it is possible. I'm looking at the questions. Is this the one from you, Tom? Let's see here. I don't see the rest of
No,
the
it's the second question. Second question on the list. It just says, can we enroll Windows 7 to Intune? Will there be any challenge if the system has SCCM agent installed on it?
No.
And I don't think we can run both the SCCM agent and the Intune agent. There is an in the older system, still available. There is a Windows 7 agent. Windows 8 and Windows 10 have, Microsoft has installed the Open Mobile Alliance device management client, OMADM client, the same kind of client that we use on mobile devices. So those devices can be managed without an agent on the device, and that's really the path going forward. Isn't that correct, Jeffrey?
It is. That's the benefit.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions here in the list. We'll give a minute to see if there anybody is. I don't think we have another follow-up slide here, but there are places here you can get in touch with us. info@oxfordcomputergroup.com, of course. You can follow us on Twitter. There's a number of us from OCG on Twitter as well. And LinkedIn, we're all on LinkedIn, and Oxford Computer Group is available on Facebook as well. So whatever social network you prefer, we're there. And I got a couple more questions coming up here. what's the biggest strength for Intune? Windows 10 management. And 2, you showed side-by-side personal and corporate apps. What's the limitation in containerizing corporate apps? Yeah, we kind of stayed away from the containerization piece story here, just because it really deserves a webinar on its own. Microsoft has taken the approach of doing mobile application management instead of the classic containerization work we've seen, whether that's Android for Work, which requires you to run 2 separate applications, one for personal and one for business, even if they're the same application. Microsoft takes the approach where the policy manages the application. And so I'm able to use Word for my personal information on my iPad, as well as corporate documents on my iPad, yet the data in the corporate is protected. And I would say the biggest strength for Intune is probably Windows 10. Windows 10 management is probably up there, but mobile device management is really where it got its start. And we have a pretty complete solution there. There are a couple of unique non-standard Android devices that we've run across that we can't support. But for the most part, we're able to do pretty much all of the mobile management that we want. So I would say that's the biggest strength. Windows 10 management, because Windows 10 is a mobile device, it just kind of falls in, and that's where you see a strength of Windows 10, being able to be managed as a mobile device. Want to use Word but maintain the save locations only being within the corporate container. That is mobile application management, and I'm sure we'll be doing a webinar shortly on that, but you can look into mobile application management if that's what you're interested in. Let me see what other questions we have here. Jeffrey, you want to take this one? Can we restrict Windows 7 device to specific user using Windows Intune so that user is allowed to log in only from that specific system? The requirement is kind of allow the access only from the allocated corporate device to the user. I don't know of a way to do that, Jeffrey.
I don't know how to lock it down to where that's the only device that they're permitted to use, unless that was the only device they had enrolled. Let me see the question again here. Can we restrict Windows 7 to a specific user? Login from that specific system. The requirement is the kind that allows access only to the allocated corporate device of the user. If that user is licensed, again, I've had a recent engagement where one of the business criteria was to lock down non-corporate or outside of the corporate environment Windows 7 systems, but any licensed user would have been able to use that system. They were in the type of scenario where only one user was going to have that system, but so restricting a Windows 7 device just to a specific user using Intune would be a bit of a stretch, but it should be possible. I would have to look into that one, to be honest with you. It's the specific user criteria. That's
actually sounds more like an authentication piece. You have to look at the device and make the determination. There are things you can do that user doesn't have the right to log onto a machine locally, so you could manage it through that. But that really kind of falls back to group policy objects, things like that we're not able to manage through Intune. So I don't think that this is really something that Intune could drive. So the next one here is we had mentioned that we saw client use Intune to manage kiosk devices that were using iPads. I'm curious to set up a number of Android devices as a kiosk mode. How much of this can be accomplished with Intune? There's less ability to manage a kiosk from Intune in Android. Android just doesn't have all the hooks for that iOS does. There's a lot of work that can be done on it to manage that, and again, it will depend a bit on the device. So we've got Android, like most things in Android, is kind of all over the map. We've got people who or devices that are just stock Android that don't have a lot of device management capability. We've got Samsung Knox, which up levels that. Now we have Android for Work, which has come out from Google, which gives us even more control. If it were the devices that running Android for Work, we probably could get pretty close to a kiosk mode for you on that. That'd be an interesting thing to look into more.
I see a question
Next.
from Adam there. Yeah, the similar question, can we restrict access from mobile devices that are not corporate owned if the device is otherwise compliant? Yes.
Well, we can restrict the enrollment of non-corporate devices in Intune, which would keep them from being compliant. So actually, we keep them from being compliant. There isn't another level to say turn that off. Can you bring that slide back up, please, Conor? And then we had, are you aware of any workaround to create a single sign-on profile for iOS device? I'm not really clear what you mean in that sense. Where
I think he means maybe a configuration profile dedicated to single sign-on.
Well, the way that single sign-on works is you get a token by logging on to a secure token service, an STS. That's how single sign-on works across the board. There's variations in the different methods that are used for that and the different formats, whether it's OpenID or OAuth or web standard forms. So the single sign-on really ends up being that the user logs on and a token is delivered along with a process that allows that token to be refreshed automatically for a period of time. Once you're logged on in any browser, single sign-on continues to work. One of the reasons single sign-on is more difficult within an iOS device is because the user doesn't log on to it, and there is no concept of Windows integrated authentication, which there is in Windows. So when I log on to my device that I've auto-enrolled in Intune and Azure AD domain joined, I select my username and I never enter a password when I go to Azure, because it takes that logon that I've used on my PC and passes that on through Windows integrated auth to my authentication, whether that's ADFS or Azure, and Bob's your uncle, I'm logged on. So it's wouldn't know how to send a profile to that. Microsoft may be doing something on that. They did an extension for Chrome that made it that kind of managed the single sign-on stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if they extended that to other browsers, or if you just put Chrome on the iOS device and have a go at that. But yeah, single sign-on's not so much in the profiles that Intune does. Jeffrey, you want to say something?
I was just noticing Scott Foreman's question beyond that about any headway made for a password configured for specifically wireless configurations. I know of none. Well,
you can. It depends on the device. So if you're doing it for Windows devices, you export the wireless config from a Windows. If you're doing it for iOS, then you use the iOS configurator and you create a custom policy for pre-shared key Wi-Fi, and you can distribute it that way. We've done that for the same customer we did the iPad kiosks for, as a matter of fact, back east, who needed to update their Wi-Fi that was being used on those kiosks. And actually that had just been done, but that was like a year ago. So it's not in Intune, but you can do it through a custom policy using the Apple configurator. Other systems will use a Kerberos proxy, which does a cert validation to convert the device cert to obtain a username, then pass that to a SAML provider. Is there a way to have SSO-like app authentication? Well, if you use the app proxy, Microsoft's Azure App proxy, we can take the authentication that you perform to your STS, whether that's Azure or Ping or ADFS or whatever your STS happens to be, and we can then consume that inside your organization using the app proxy and convert that back to a Kerberos ticket so you can use your internal resources. But I don't know of a path to go the other way, because we really don't often. I don't know why you would have a Kerberos ticket on an iOS device. But what these other systems do, MobileIron and AirWatch, is they create a tunnel into your organization that allows you to authenticate as that user, and then they're able to do some tricks for single sign-on based on that. I've seen some other things in Windows doing similar type things, but yeah, not really a piece in Intune. Looks like we're running right up against our time, and looks like we got the last question in there. Anything you wanted to add, Jeffrey or Connor, before we end the presentation?
No, apologize for the little technical glitches that I experienced, but I hope everyone gleaned some information of use out of that.
It was still useful, I'm certain. So thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.